before they know how to deduce their own.
That's amazing. It's much more deeply, as I said, psychological than I had imagined. I do have related questions
Sure.
to further what you're saying, although I want to kind of go off and keep chit-chatting about that for a long time.
Yes.
But in duty to the class for this evening, can you talk and return to a little bit about, part of the class is about wine tasting procedures, but the role of memory. How do you maintain a memory of a particular, how do you recognize what you're drinking if you don't know what it is? How do you retain a memory, a taste memory of that? Can
Sure.
you explain
So it's
that a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. So you potentially you could store an infinite amount of memory, potentially. It's all about how much you can access. And so, is that true?
Yes.
Okay, great.
You're so well trained, Sam.
Thank you. I had a great psychology teacher, actually. So when you think about that you can fit everything into almost a library. It's just about accessing it. And it does, just for instance, like with the wine training, it's muscle memory at the end of the day. So when you're smelling a glass of wine, and it takes you to a specific memory where you might have smelled strawberries, right? But the way that you perceive strawberries is not necessarily the way that I remember perceiving strawberries.
Yeah, right.
But as long as we're in the classification of red fruit, it's a base start.
Okay.
And so it's almost like when you smell gasoline in the air, you automatically think gasoline because of exposure and because of repetition.
Yes.
And so when you think about exposure and repetition and you utilize things like that in day-to-day training, your senses are sharp. And so you can even sharpen them even higher and higher and higher and build layers and layers and layers upon repetition and exposure. And if you keep smelling gasoline and you keep exposing yourself to gasoline, and then you repeat that cycle over and over and over again, by the time in a month or 2 months, and you're going to be able to pick gasoline out of the air from a mile away. And so it's about doing that, but doing that with everything, and saying, when's the last time you smelled some dried wood?
Right.
Or when's the last time you smelled ripe strawberries versus underripe strawberries? Or you've seen green strawberries or baked strawberries.
Right.
And so you know all those different fruit aromas, and you're keeping them kind of like a library available for access. And it's the same thing when you're smelling wine, or like when you taste food. And you taste food on your palate, and you say, oh my goodness, it's salty. Right? It's the same thing when your brain is recognizing what salt tastes like and you start salivating. And so you can actually smell thousands and thousands of things, but you can only prospectively taste 4.
Right.
5 if you count umami, which is a really weird one.
We throw it in the class.
We throw it in the
We threw it in.
So really you can do 4, but you can smell thousands of things. And so when you think about how powerful your nose can be,
Yes.
you can really decipher what a wine is going to be like. But when you coincide what you're smelling based upon what your palate is, there's also another important sense as well, what your sight is. And
Yes,
so,
I had read something in the in our textbook that said, and you've covered almost everything that I wanted to talk about. This like our truck go past. There was something in here about tasting wine in glasses that were blacked out, so you actually couldn't get psychologically influenced by the look of it to just experience the taste. Did you ever hear of anybody doing that?
we've done well. We do trainings like that actually.
Really?
So it's more on a more experience. Like for instance, with the sommelier team that I currently work with Sea Island, there's about 5 of us that run the wine and spirits program for the whole resort. And so I have a rather large footprint for River Bar, but it's great to keep up with sharpening your nose, and like you stated, sometimes you can be influenced on a wine's characteristics based upon already knowing that it's a red wine.
Yes.
And plus, and I deal with that all the time, but to really sharpen your nose is just like if you were to be blindfolded and you were to rely only on your nose and only on your palate. And there are so many wines that I could put in front of you that if you were blindfolded, you would call them white wines as opposed to red. And we've done exercises like this to see if that is really true, and it is so true.
No way.
It is so true. And so it's great when you take into account that as muscle memory, as we stated before. It does it, so it's fun to really dive into that. But we've done that before, and it's proven to be really true that sight influences what you're going to smell and what you're going to taste as well.
That's really fascinating. I think in the textbook it added sometimes there might be a little cloud to the wine, and it doesn't necessarily mean that wine has been damaged or it's going to be a bad taste. but rather that we have associations to something looking, as you said, red or white or rosé, and we have already a preconceived, almost like muscle memory imposed upon what it looks like. But if you remove that information and just have to dive into the wine itself, you can derive so much more.
It's like with food.
It's fascinating.
My wife tends to not like mushrooms, right? But if she gets them prepared a certain way,
Yes.
she tends to like them.
Yes.
She had an experience at escargot, right? Snails. So for those of you that do not know what escargot is,
I like them.
so I love escargot, but my wife has never had them before. So when we dined in the Colton Allison,
Yes.
it was a great experience for her because she didn't know what they were, but she enjoyed them.
Aw.
But when she thought about them being snails, after
Yeah.
I told her after she ate them,
Yes.
you enjoyed it.
Yes.
So it's great how kind of that influence will play a really big part on what you're expecting something to taste like, or even like with mushrooms, if you prefer them sautéed in those
Yes.
big portobello mushrooms with that round ring.
Yes.
If you like them all slimy and sautéed in that style, you might not like them because
You're
of the texture, but you might like them if they're presented a different way.
I love
they're
that.
presented fried,
So-
or they're presented pan-seared, or they're presented poached, or in a different means of preparation.
You're making me think of the importance of why of having a fine dining experience, because it breaks through all our preconceived notions of what we think foods that we like or don't like.
Mhm.
Because we have limited culinary experiences, most of us in our own homes. But to have somebody else prepare food for us, I think I ate something in Portugal at a Michelin star rated. I think it has a star. And
Even to have 1 star at that level is impressive.
I wouldn't. It was very moving experience. I just didn't understand it until I ate what I ate, and it was such a moving dining experience. And I had something. I think it was like a sorbet that was fish flavored. And if you told someone you would have a salmon sorbet to eat, they'd say, But it was all incorporated with this dish, and it was absolutely an unbelievable experience. So I completely understand.
You were very spoiled in Portugal. I saw all the pictures. You literally were in places that only we dream of going.
Well,
So-
Sam, I invite you to join. You and Kaja can come and meet me in Porto, and I will help you do these wine caves.
And we can go into the Taylor Flaggate
Yes,
cellar
you have to
again.
go up the hill, and you go into the wine caves. It's absolutely fascinating.
Oh, I bet.
So I will. I'm your best friend as soon as you want to go and do that.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
you will blow them away because you will be an awesome catch for them. Also.
Thank you.
I think what I'll do is maybe just go through my questions and make sure there's
Sure,
not
no,
something
please.
that you're so like I have unbelievable information. I think just through casual conversation we've been able to talk about this. I think you've covered. I'll end on kind of one question, not because I want to let you go, but
Sure.
I think I do have to eventually let you go to work. I guess I'm
That's okay.
interested in
Sure.
maybe this is a good way to end. So in the textbook it says that there's a process of spitting out wine. Is that something that is part of your training, or is that something that people think that sommeliers do when they're in training? And why would one do that to wine?
Sure. So the spitting out process of wine is not something that, of course, if the wine is delicious, you might have to swallow some of it. But nonetheless, it's the spitting out process is more to assess a wine. What we do is very professional, and this is a profession that you have to show a lot of respect for. Also, you have to show a lot of self-control. And so, although we do taste wine constantly, that we taste spirits constantly, you do get a certain amount of alcohol that is absorbed through your gums.
Right, and you're working.
And you're working. So
right.
add it up over the day,
Mm-hmm.
multiple different tastings, and we do hour-long tastings sometimes. So multiple different tastings can add up to things. So it's about having a lot of self-control, because we taste some very good wine. We also taste some very bad wine sometimes, and then we also taste really good spirits, and then really good beer. But it's about a profession that you have to show a lot of respect for. So we do that in spitting out, and we do not want to overindulge
All
on,
right.
a
That's
product. So
really helpful to
sure,
us.
but we do actually, whenever, for instance, if we do a flight of wine, and it's a part of the Court of Master Sommeliers actually, when we do our certifications, we are graded on three different tiers really. So it's a 3-part exam. So tasting being the first thing that you accomplish, and it's usually at 9 o'clock in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
So and in order to prepare for that, what do we do?
About that, yes.
We taste at 9 in the morning, and a lot of times between 9 and 11, your palate's the most active because it hasn't been worked for the shortest period of time.
It's just awoken.
It's just awoken. So it tends to be the best time to really sharpen your palate and to really start tasting wine and tasting spirits, really. So not saying I would recommend it before your job,
but it makes
perfect sense.
Yes.
So we actually, in order to train for this exam, we actually start tasting at 9, 11 o'clock in the morning, and then we'll go into work. And so there's a lot of studying that goes into it, but the final tier that we do, well, the last two tiers are theory, which is of course a practical on your world knowledge of wine, but as well as spirits and non-alcoholic items. Like for instance, we have to know coffee as well as we know sake, and so we have to know really every beverage in existence, which is massive, but it's a focus on wine. And so after we get done with our theory, we have to move into a service practical where we have to, for instance, Dr. Bloom, you are a master sommelier and you are sitting at a table at which they are, in a lot of times during the service practicals, there's 1 to 2 to 3 master sommeliers at a table, and they pretend to not know anything about anything, which they have probably forgotten more than you'll ever know. So they pretend to be that guest that doesn't know anything about wine, and they go through a service practical with you. Whether it be opening a bottle of champagne tableside, whether it be decanting an item, whether it be just serving a still bottle of wine or serving a bottle of sake. It could be practically anything they want. And they grill you up and down. They might ask you to name 4 different producers in Transylvania.
Whoa.
And so they ask you some really obscure things to see how you react in a tableside conversation.
Yes.
So when you do your tasting, they line up a flight of 6 wines, and 3 of them are white and 3 of them are red for the level 3 and for the level 4 exam. So the level 3 I'll be sitting for hopefully in about 7 months. So I'm going to the course in Dallas, Texas in June, and they're expensive courses. This one is upwards of $2,000 already. And so they're very expensive, at least to attempt, and there's not a reimbursement if you fail. And so you have to pass all 3 parts consecutively. But for the tasting portion, there's 3 whites and 3 reds, and there's a spit cup always presented whenever we do our tasting exams. So it's almost I guess you could say it's definitely influenced that we use a spit cup whenever we're tasting our wines, just to kind of reiterate that term that we are professionals. And so